First Contact's price. The Meridian Council's emergency chamber had never felt so cold. Ambassador Vextal's crystalline appendages trembled as she projected the latest battle footage onto the chamber's curved walls. The images showed massive dark shapes tearing through their most advanced defensive fleet like tissue paper. The swarm had arrived at their doorstep, and hope was dying. 37 worlds, she announced, her voice modulator struggling to maintain composure. 37 of our colony worlds have fallen in the past solar cycle. Our remaining fleets cannot hold them back. The gathered counselors, representing the last unified worlds of the Meridian Collective, watched in silence as another recording showed their most advanced dreadnought being torn apart by the biological horrors that had emerged from deep space 6 cycles ago. High Counselor Zinra, their oldest and wisest leader, raised a tendril. What of the rumors? The stories of the species from the Forbidden Zones. Vextal's crystal structure flickered with anxiety. Everyone knew of the Forbidden Zones, regions of space deemed too hostile for civilized life. Worlds with crushing gravity, toxic atmospheres, and temperature variations that would shatter most sentient species. But the rumors, those were different. The stories appear to be true, she admitted. Our long-range scouts confirmed it 3 days ago. There is a spacefaring species that originated from one such death world. They call themselves humans. The chamber erupted in overlapping harmonic frequencies, the Meridian equivalent of shocked whispers. Counselor Kexvi, the youngest among them, pulsed with disbelief. Impossible. No intelligent life could evolve in such conditions. The gravitational forces alone would make them stronger than anything we've ever encountered. Vextal interrupted. She projected new images, these taken from careful observation of the third planet in an unremarkable yellow star system. The counselors watched beings moving effortlessly under crushing gravity, surviving temperature swings that would shatter crystal matrices, and breathing an atmosphere that would corrode standard hulls. They've achieved faster than light travel, Zinra asked. Recently, yes. They're expanding cautiously, but their capabilities. Vextal paused, gathering courage. They've already repelled 3 separate attempts at invasion or colonization by other species. Their method of warfare is unlike anything we've seen. The footage shifted to a battle recording, showing human ships using maneuvers that should have killed their crews from forces alone. Their weapons were primitive by Meridian standards, primarily kinetic weapons rather than energy-based, but devastatingly effective. The swarm approaches our core worlds, Vextal continued. Our traditional allies have already fallen or retreated to the galactic rim. We have one option left. She straightened her crystalline form. I propose we request human intervention. The chamber fell silent. Even the background harmonic hum of their environmental systems seemed muted. Zinra floated forward, their ancient crystal form catching the light. You suggest we invite Deathworlders into our civilization, the very beings we've spent generations avoiding. I suggest, Vextal replied firmly, that we need beings who understand how to survive against impossible odds. The swarm adapts to every energy weapon we develop. They shrug off our most advanced shields, but they've never faced a species that evolved on a world that tries to kill them daily. She projected one final image, a human rescue operation on a volcanic moon. The beings moved through conditions that would kill most species, saving survivors from a mining accident. They're not just strong, she added softly. They use their strength to protect. The debate raged for hours. Some counselors argued that inviting humans into their space would be cultural suicide. Others pointed out that the swarm would ensure their actual suicide if nothing changed. Finally, Zinra raised all 4 tendrils for silence. Show us, they commanded, what these humans do when they're not fighting. Show us who we're considering inviting into our worlds. Vextal had prepared for this. The next series of images showed humans in various situations, teaching their young, building communities, creating art, and most importantly, helping each other survive. They call their homeworld Earth, she explained. It's a planet that experiences earthquakes, massive storms, volcanic eruptions, and extreme climate variations. Yet they don't just survive. They've built a civilization that celebrates creativity, exploration, and mutual aid. And you believe they'll help us? Kexvi asked. Why would they risk themselves for crystalline beings they've never met? Because, Vextol responded, I studied their historical records, time and again, when faced with the choice between standing aside or helping others in danger, they consistently choose to help. They have a saying, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. The council chamber grew quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence, one of consideration rather than fear. Finally, Zinra spoke. Contact them. But understand this, if we invite these Deathworlders into our space, our civilization will never be the same. Vextel's crystal structure pulsed with determined light. With respect, High Counselor, if we don't invite them, we won't have a civilization left to change. As she prepared the first contact package, Vextel reviewed the human historical records one more time. Their planet had tried to kill them countless times, yet each disaster had only made them more determined to survive and help others do the same. The swarm thought itself unstoppable because it could adapt to any weapon. But the swarm had never faced a species that had turned adaptation itself into an art form. It had never encountered beings who saw impossible situations as personal challenges. Most importantly, it had never fought enemies who had evolved on a world that made them stronger with every attempt to break them. The message she finally composed was simple. To the people of Earth, we face extinction at the hands of an enemy that adapts to everything we throw at it. We've observed your species. You don't just survive, you thrive in conditions that would kill most life forms. We need your help. More importantly, we need you to teach us how to help ourselves. As the message transmitted across the light years toward Earth, Vextol wondered if she had just saved her civilization or doomed it. Either way, nothing would ever be the same. The Deathworlders were coming, and the galaxy was about to learn what that truly meant. The art of survival. Captain Sarah Chen stood in Earth's orbital command station, watching the crystalline alien ambassador through reinforced glass. The beam's translucent form caught the starlight, sending rainbow refractions across the observation deck. Even through the environmental barriers, Sarah could feel the cold radiating from Vextel's environmental suit. So let me get this straight, Sarah said, reviewing the holographic display of the swarm's advance. These biological entities adapt to every weapon used against them. Correct. Vextel's translator converted her harmonics into human speech. Our most advanced energy weapons became useless within days of first contact. They evolve at an unprecedented rate. Sarah smiled, an expression that still unnerved the ambassador. But they've never faced kinetic weapons, have they? Never had to adapt to good old-fashioned physics. I don't understand, Vextel admitted. Sarah turned to the other humans in the room. Admiral James Rodriguez, Earth Defense Force's strategic commander, was already nodding. Dr. Maya Patel, their lead xenobiologist, was frantically taking notes, and Chief Engineer Kai Wong was grinning like a child on Christmas morning. You see, Sarah explained, pulling up images of Earth's history, our species didn't evolve with energy weapons. We spent millennia figuring out how to use our planet's properties against our enemies. Gravity, momentum, atmospheric pressure. These aren't just obstacles to us. They're tools. The display showed ancient hunting techniques, medieval siege weapons, and modern military operations. While other species focused on overcoming their environments, we learned to use ours to our advantage. Dr. Patel stepped forward, her dark eyes bright with excitement. The swarm adapts through biological evolution, correct. But there are fundamental physical limits to what biology can achieve. You can't evolve away from the laws of physics. Vextel's crystal structure flickered, their equivalent of a thoughtful frown. But your weapons seem so primitive compared to ours. Primitive. Chief Wong laughed. We're about to show you the difference between complex and effective. He brought up schematics of what the engineering teams had been developing since receiving the Meridian's distress call. The design showed weapons that made Vextal's crystal structure pulse with shock. Railguns that could accelerate projectiles to speeds that would tear through any biological adaptation. Gravity manipulation systems that could crush even the most resilient organisms. Atmospheric processors that could turn the very air into a weapon. But the most important thing we'll teach you, Admiral Rodriguez added, isn't about weapons at all. It's about mindset. The Admiral led them to the station's training deck. Through another window, Vextal watched human crews running drills in environments that simulated different planetary conditions. They practiced in crushing gravity, toxic atmospheres, and extreme temperatures. Your people see harsh conditions as obstacles, Sarah explained. We see them as challenges to overcome, then advantages to exploit. The swarm adapts to survive. Great. We'll show them what real survival looks like. The next few weeks transformed the orbital station into a hub of interspecies cooperation. Meridian engineers worked alongside humans, learning not just new technologies but new ways of thinking. They watched in amazement as humans deliberately trained in conditions worse than what they'd face in battle. Why? Vextal asked one day, watching a team run exercises in double Earth gravity. Why make it harder than necessary? Sarah's response stuck with the ambassador. Because the universe doesn't care what's necessary. It'll throw everything it has at you. The trick isn't to avoid the hard things. It's to make yourself harder to break. The humans' approach challenged everything the Meridians thought they knew about warfare and survival. While the crystalline beings had spent generations developing perfect energy weapons and impenetrable shields, humans focused on using their environment as both weapon and armor. Dr. Patel's research team made another crucial discovery. The swarm's adaptation rate is impressive, she reported during a strategic meeting. But it comes at a cost. They have to sacrifice existing adaptations to develop new ones. They're not becoming stronger. They're just shifting their weaknesses around. This revelation led to a new strategy. Instead of trying to develop weapons the swarm couldn't adapt to, they would force them to adapt to multiple threats simultaneously. The process would overtax their evolution until they couldn't maintain their defensive adaptations. As the joint fleet prepared for their first engagement, Vextal observed a quiet conversation between Sarah and a young Meridian engineer. The engineer's crystal structure was dulled with fear. But what if we fail? The engineer asked. What if our best isn't good enough? Sarah's response embodied everything Vextal was coming to understand about humans. Then we'll fail better the next time. And the next. And we'll keep failing better until we succeed. That's the real art of survival. Not avoiding failure, but learning from it. The engineer's structure brightened slightly. Is that how humans became so strong? We became strong, Sarah said, because our world never gave us the option to be weak. But we became wise when we realized that strength means nothing if you don't use it to help others become strong too. As the fleet made final preparations, Vextal sent one last message to the Meridian Council. The humans are not what we expected. They don't just survive Deathworld conditions. They master them. They don't just fight enemies. They adapt, improvise, and overcome. But most surprisingly, they don't see their strength as something that sets them apart. They see it as something to share. The first battle against the swarm was approaching, and for the first time since the invasion began, Vextal felt something new. Not just hope, but curiosity. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you pushed a Deathworld species into a corner. The swarm thought it was unstoppable because it could adapt to any weapon. It was about to learn that humans had turned adaptation itself into a weapon, and they were eager to teach their new allies how to do the same. When gravity falls, the Meridian colony world of Christos hung in space like a diamond caught in starlight. Its rings of ice and mineral fragments glittered against the backdrop of nebula clouds. But the beauty of the scene was marred by the approaching darkness, the living shadow of the swarm fleet. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the EDF Prometheus, watching the tactical display with steady eyes. Around her, the joint human Meridian crew worked with practiced precision, months of training evident in their synchronized movements. Even the environmental differences had become an advantage. The Meridian crew members could operate in the super-cooled sections of the ship that would freeze human tissue, while humans handled the high-temperature engineering spaces that would shatter crystal forms. Swarm fleet approaching optimal range, reported Lieutenant Kai Wong from his engineering station. Gravitational lensing system is charged and ready. Sarah nodded, watching the enemy ships advance. The swarm moved like a living thing, because it was billions of biomechanical organisms working as one vast intelligence. Their ships weren't built, they were grown. In previous encounters, they had adapted to every energy weapon the Meridians deployed, developing biological shields that could absorb or reflect any attack. They're still using the same approach, Dr. Maya Patel observed from her science station, her voice tight with anticipation. Multiple layers of bioelectric shielding, exactly as our scouts reported. Of course they are. Sarah smiled. Why change what's always worked? She opened a channel to the rest of the joint fleet. All ships, execute Operation Gravity's Rainbow. Phase 1. Commence. The human ships moved first, performing maneuvers that would have liquefied any unprepared crew. They dove into Crystallos's gravity well, using the planet's mass to accelerate to speeds that made their conventional engines look primitive by comparison. The swarm reacted predictably, their bioelectric shields strengthening to deal with the expected energy weapon assault. Instead, they faced something no biological system could adapt to quickly enough: physics itself. Launch gravity charges, Sarah ordered. Small projectiles shot from the human ships, each containing a miniaturized gravity manipulation device. The swarm ignored them, their sensors tuned to detect energy weapons. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. The charges detonated, creating localized fields of intense gravitational force. Swarm ships caught in the fields were torn apart, their biological components unable to maintain structural integrity under forces no natural evolution could prepare them for. Those that survived the initial attack found themselves being pulled in multiple directions as overlapping gravity fields created a deadly web of spatial distortion. Phase 2, Sarah commanded. Meridian ships, you have your targets. The crystalline vessels emerged from hiding, their unique construction allowing them to navigate the gravitational chaos. They had been modified with human-designed kinetic weapons, rail guns that used magnetic acceleration to launch projectiles at speeds approaching that of light. The swarm's bioelectric shields, optimized to deflect energy weapons, might as well have been tissue paper against solid slugs moving at relativistic velocities. But the swarm wasn't finished. The surviving ships began to change, their organic hulls rippling as they adapted to the new threats. Denser armor grew to resist the kinetic impacts. Specialized organs developed to detect and avoid the gravity charges. They're adapting faster than predicted, Dr. Puddle reported, her fingers flying over her console. At this rate, they'll develop countermeasures in minutes. Sarah's smile grew wider. Right on schedule. Execute Phase 3. This was what they had trained for, while the swarm focused on adapting to the gravity weapons and kinetic strikes. Human dropships launched from the Prometheus's belly. Inside them, teams of human marines in specially designed combat suits waited alongside Meridian shock troops. The swarm never saw them coming. Their attention was focused on the large-scale threats, missing the smaller ships until they were already attached to their hulls. The boarding teams cut their way inside using tools that functioned on simple thermal principles. No complex energy weapons for the swarm to adapt to, just the basic physics of heat and cold. Team Alpha reporting successful breach, came the first call. These things, they're incredible. The entire ship is alive. But it still has to obey the laws of thermodynamics. The human Meridian teams moved through the swarm ships like a virus through a body. They didn't try to fight the living vessels on their own terms. Instead, they introduced chaos into ordered systems. A carefully placed thermal charge would freeze one section while superheating another, creating structural stresses no biological system could compensate for. Meridian troops used their crystalline nature to survive in sections of the ship that had been deliberately depressurized, while humans operated in areas too hot or gravitationally intense for their allies. On the Prometheus's bridge, Sarah watched the tactical display as swarm ship after swarm ship went dark. The enemy was adapting, yes, but they couldn't adapt to everything at once. Each new defense they developed left them vulnerable to another attack vector. The Crystallis defense grid is back online, reported Lieutenant Wong. Meridian ground forces are reporting all landing zones secure. Sarah allowed herself a moment to breathe. This was just one battle, one world saved. The swarm would be back, with new adaptations and countermeasures. But they had proven something vital today. The combined strength of human ingenuity and Meridian resilience could stand against even an enemy that evolved to counter every attack. As the remaining swarm ships retreated, leaving their dead and dying vessels behind, Sarah opened a channel to Vextal's ship. "Ambassador, I believe your science teams will want to study those wrecks. There's a lot we can learn about how they adapt." Indeed, Vextal responded, her crystalline form glowing with what Sarah had learned to recognize as excitement. "Though I believe we have learned something even more valuable today." "Oh, yes, we learned that the true strength of a species lies not in their ability to adapt to adversity, but in their willingness to teach others how to do the same." Sarah watched as human and Meridian rescue teams began coordinating recovery operations, working together to save what survivors they could find, even from the swarm ships. "That's the real lesson of surviving on a death world," she said quietly. "Everything tries to kill you, so you learn to help each other live." The battle for Crystallis was over, but the war was far from finished. The swarm would return, stronger and more adapted than before, but they would find their prey had learned new ways to survive, new ways to fight, and most importantly, new ways to work together. As the joint fleet began cleanup operations, Sarah couldn't help but think that perhaps this was humanity's true purpose in the galaxy, not to be the strongest or the most advanced, but to teach others that survival wasn't about being the toughest. It was about being clever, being adaptable, and never facing the darkness alone. Mercy's Edge. The quarantine lab aboard the EDF Prometheus hummed with activity. Dr. Maya Patel stood before a containment chamber, studying the creature floating in the nutrient bath within. The captured swarm organism pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, its tentacle-like appendages pressed against the transparent walls of its enclosure. "Fascinating," she murmured, making notes on her tablet. "It's not just adapting anymore, it's trying to communicate." Ambassador Vextal's crystalline form shimmered with concern. "Is it safe to keep one alive? Our previous attempts to study captured specimens resulted in disaster. They always found ways to escape or signal the hive." Maya smiled, adjusting the containment field settings. "That's because you tried to hold them with energy barriers. We're using old-school physical containment, multiple layers of transparent aluminum, atmospheric controls, and good old-fashioned gravity manipulation. No fancy tech for them to adapt around." The swarm creature shifted its patterns, creating complex geometrical shapes with its bioluminescence. Maya's translation algorithm worked to decode the meanings, but she was beginning to recognize some patterns even without it. "It's scared," she said softly. Vextal's structure pulsed with surprise. "Scared? These are the beings that destroyed 37 of our worlds. They don't feel fear, they only adapt and consume." "Everything feels fear," Maya countered. "It's one of the most basic survival mechanisms. And this one? It's alone, cut off from its hive, surrounded by beings it can't adapt to defeat. Of course it's scared." The lab door slid open as Captain Sarah Chen entered, followed by Chief Engineer Wong. They'd just finished overseeing repairs to Crystallos' defensive systems, incorporating new hybrid technology that combined human practical engineering with Meridian crystal tech. "How's our guest?" Sarah asked, studying the containment chamber. "Communicative," Maya replied. "And I think I'm starting to understand why the swarm attacks as it does." She pulled up a holographic display showing the creature's cellular structure. "Look at this. Their biological adaptation isn't just a defense mechanism. It's how they learn about new species." The display showed how the swarm organism's cells changed in response to different stimuli. "They don't just adapt to survive attacks," Maya explained. "They adapt to understand their attackers. Every weapon used against them becomes a data point, teaching them about the species they're fighting." "So the attacks aren't just about conquest," Sarah mused. "They're gathering information." "Exactly. But they've never encountered a species that uses the environment itself as a weapon. How do you adapt to understand beings that turn the fundamental forces of the universe against you?" The swarm creature's patterns shifted again, more rapidly now. Maya's translation algorithm beeped as it decoded a clear message. Purpose, understand, method, adapt, result, failure, query, teach. The humans in the room exchanged glances while Vextal's crystal structure frosted with shock. "It's asking us to teach it." "Makes sense," Kai said, studying the readings. "Their whole existence is built around learning through adaptation. When that failed, they're trying something new, direct communication." Sarah stepped closer to the containment chamber. "Can it understand us?" Maya nodded. "Increasingly well. It's been analyzing our language patterns just like it analyzes everything else. The difference is, we're the first species to keep one alive long enough for it to learn without fighting." The captain considered this for a long moment. "Ask it why the swarm attacks other civilizations." Maya input the query. The creature's response came in pulses of light. Purpose, evolution, method, conflict, understanding through adaptation, peace, stagnation, war, growth. "It's not evil," Maya said quietly. "Its species just never learned another way to grow and understand." Sarah's expression shifted to one that Maya had learned to recognize, the look she got when facing a problem that needed an unconventional solution. "Then let's teach them one." Over the next weeks, the quarantine lab became an unprecedented experiment in interspecies education. The swarm creature, which the human crew had started calling Echo, for its habit of mimicking patterns shown to it, proved to be an eager student. They taught it games, simple puzzle games at first, then more complex strategic challenges. Each game introduced new concepts of interaction that didn't involve conflict or adaptation through combat. Echo learned to communicate more clearly, not by adapting its biology, but by choosing to use patterns that its human and Meridian teachers could better understand. "Look at this," Maya said one day, showing the others Echo's cellular scans. "It's still adapting, but differently now. Instead of developing weapons or defenses, it's optimizing its communication organs. It's choosing to evolve toward better understanding." Vextal, who had been skeptical at first, now spent hours in the lab, teaching Echo about Meridian crystal harmonics. "It learns so quickly," she admitted, "and not just about weaknesses to exploit. It's learning about our art, our music, our ways of thinking." The breakthrough came during a routine communication session. Echo's patterns formed a complex message. Understanding achieved. Method, peace superior to conflict. Query, teach hive. The implications stunned everyone. Echo wasn't just learning. It wanted to share its new understanding with the entire swarm. But the risks were enormous. "It could be a trap," Vextal warned. "The moment we let it contact the hive, it could transmit everything it's learned about our defenses." Or, Sarah countered, "it could be our best chance to end this war without destroying either side." She turned to Maya. "What do you think? You've spent the most time with it." Maya watched Echo's patterns, remembering all the interactions over the past weeks. I think I think this is exactly what humanity is supposed to do in the galaxy. We don't just survive in hostile conditions, we learn to thrive in them, and then we teach others to do the same. The decision wasn't easy, but in the end, they chose to trust in the same spirit of adaptation and learning that had brought humanity to the stars. Under carefully controlled conditions, they allowed Echo to establish limited contact with the swarm hive mind. The message it sent wasn't what anyone expected. Not a transmission of tactical data or defense weaknesses, but something far more powerful. The concept that adaptation through cooperation was superior to adaptation through conflict. The response from the swarm was not immediate, but it was clear. Across the frontier, swarm ships began to pull back, not in retreat, but in what appeared to be contemplation. They had encountered something entirely new. A species that had not only survived their adaptive attacks, but had shown them a completely different way to grow and learn. As Maya recorded these events in her log, she couldn't help but smile at the irony. Humans, the Deathworlders, the species that had evolved on a planet that constantly tried to kill them, had taught one of the galaxy's most fearsome forces that survival didn't have to mean endless conflict. Perhaps, she wrote, this is the true test of intelligence, not just the ability to adapt and survive, but the wisdom to know when to stop fighting and start teaching. Echo's patterns formed one final message before the day ended. Gratitude. Purpose revised. Understanding through cooperation. Query. Continue learning. Always, Maya responded, knowing that this was just the beginning of a very different kind of adaptation. Legacy of the Deathworld. 5 years after the Battle of Kristalos, the observation deck of Earth's new Galactic Exchange Center offered a view that would have once seemed impossible. Ambassador Vextel stood beside Captain Sarah Chen, watching ships from dozens of species dock at the station. Among them, unmistakable in their organic design, were swarm vessels, no longer coming as invaders, but as participants in the greatest scientific and cultural exchange program the galaxy had ever seen. Sometimes I still can't believe it, Vextel said, her crystalline form refracting the light of Earth's sun. 10 years ago, we thought humanity's death world nature made you too dangerous to contact. 5 years ago, we thought it made you our only hope for survival. Now, she gestured at the scene before them. Sarah smiled, watching a swarm ship delicately maneuver into a docking port specifically designed for their unique biology. Now you know what we learned from Earth a long time ago. Surviving hard conditions doesn't just make you strong. It teaches you how to help others survive too. The station itself was a testament to that philosophy. Unlike traditional space stations that tried to create uniform conditions suitable for one or two species, this one embraced environmental diversity. Different sections maintained different gravities, atmospheres, and temperatures, allowing each species to work in their optimal conditions while learning to cooperate across environmental barriers. Dr. Maya Patel's voice came over the station's comm system. Captain, Ambassador, they're ready for you in the exchange chamber. They made their way through the station's adaptive corridors, another innovation born from human experience with varying environments. The walls could shift their properties to protect different species as they moved through the station, much like how Earth's earliest humans had learned to adapt their clothing and shelter to survive in every climate. The exchange chamber was packed with representatives from across known space. Meridian crystalline beings floated beside humanoid species from various worlds. Swarm organisms pulsed with bioluminescent patterns in their specialized containment areas, now used for comfort rather than security. And in the center of it all stood Echo, the first swarm organism to learn a different way of understanding. The Adaptive Learning Initiative's first 5 years have exceeded all projections. Echo's translated patterns appeared on screens around the chamber. 17 former conflict zones have been converted to cooperative research stations. Swarm adaptation capabilities, combined with human environmental engineering and meridian crystal technology, have led to breakthroughs in environmental restoration, medical science, and space exploration. Chief Engineer Wong, now heading the initiative's technology division, stepped forward to present the latest data. By combining the swarm's adaptive biology with human practical engineering and meridian crystal tech, we've developed new ways to terraform hostile worlds, protect vulnerable species, and explore previously inaccessible regions of space. The presentation continued, but Sarah found herself watching the interactions among the attendees more than the data. A young meridian engineer was explaining crystal harmonics to a fascinated group of human students. A swarm researcher was collaborating with a team of mixed species on new applications for adaptive biology and medicine. This was humanity's real victory, not defeating the swarm, but helping turn an enemy into an ally and showing the galaxy a new way to grow stronger. After the formal presentations, Sarah found herself back on the observation deck with Vextal and Maya. They watched Earth rotating below them, its dynamic weather systems and varied environments, now seen not as threats to be overcome, but as the crucible that had forged humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. "You know what still amazes me?" Maya said, reviewing data from her latest research project. A collaboration between human doctors, meridian crystal healers, and swarm adaptive biologists. We spent so much time thinking our planet was trying to kill us, when really it was teaching us the most important lesson of all. "What's that?" Vextal asked. "That true strength isn't about being tough enough to survive on your own. It's about learning how to help everyone survive together." Sarah nodded, watching a group of new arrivals experiencing Earth gravity for the first time. Instead of struggling alone, they were being helped by a mixed team of humans, meridians, and other species, each contributing their unique perspectives on adapting to challenging conditions. "That's the real legacy of coming from a death world," Sarah said. "Not that we learned to survive anything, but that we learned survival works better as a team sport." The station's adaptive systems hummed quietly, maintaining the perfect balance of environments that allowed such diverse species to work together. In the distance, another swarm ship approached, its organic hull now modified with human and meridian technology, a living symbol of how former enemies could become partners in exploration and discovery. "The galaxy once feared us for evolving on a world that tried to kill us," Sarah mused. "Now they understand that harsh conditions don't just create survivors, they create teachers." Vextal's crystal structure pulsed with what Sarah had learned was joy. "And that's why humanity's real strength was never in your ability to survive a death world." "No?" Maya asked. "No," the ambassador replied. "It was in your ability to take everything your world taught you about survival and turn it into lessons about cooperation, adaptation, and hope. You didn't just master your harsh world, you learned how to help others master their challenges too." As the Earth turned below them, its ever-changing face a reminder of the conditions that had shaped humanity, Sarah thought about how far they'd all come. The galaxy had feared the Deathworlders, then needed them, and finally understood them. And in understanding humanity's true strength, not just the ability to survive, but the drive to help others survive too, they had all become something greater than they could have been alone. The legacy of Earth, the death world that had forged humanity, wasn't just in creating a species tough enough to survive anything. It was in creating a species wise enough to know that the greatest survival trait of all was the ability to work together, learn from each other, and face the universe not as competitors in a deadly game, but as partners in the greatest adventure of all living, growing, and exploring together. As another mixed team of species passed by, engaged in animated discussion about some new project, Sarah smiled. The Deathworlders had indeed changed the galaxy, not through force or fear, but through the simple, powerful lesson that survival wasn't about being the strongest, but about helping each other become strong together.